Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really weird 1980s mystery. It's one of those stories that starts off looking like a literal glitch in physical reality, but as you'll see, it ends up taking us deep, deep inside the human mind. But before we get to the facts, I want you to ask yourself something. Have you ever actively chosen not to solve a mystery? Think about it. Think about a time you avoided finding out the truth about something simply because you were terrified of what the answer might be. Keep that feeling in mind, because that deeply human instinct, that's exactly what drives the whole story we're unpacking today. Part 1. The Cassette Incident, a 1980s mystery. So, our protagonist today goes by the pen named Tazzledock, and his entire existential crisis gets triggered by a cheap, broken piece of 1980s plastic. Looking at the timeline here, this wasn't an overnight mystery. About a year prior to the main event, Tazzledock accidentally broke the cassette door off his player. Sometime later, he's kind of splitting his living situation between an old place and a temporary new place. And then we have the drive, the fateful night the unit takes a ride in his friend Oscar's truck. Let's zoom in on that initial break first, because this detail is absolutely critical. Tazzledock was just trying to pry a stuck tape out of the player, and when he did, the entire hinge component completely snapped off on one side of the unibody. Because of this structural damage, when the door fell out, it didn't fall cleanly. It fell in a very distinctive, tilted, uneven way, precisely because only one hinge was left. Hold on to that detail, it's super important.
Part 2. Truck Ride Discovery. The anomaly begins.
All right, fast forward to that drive with his friend Oscar. They're heading back to the temporary new place, it's getting dark out, and the cassette unit is riding in the bed of Oscar's pickup truck. When they arrive, Tazzledock walks to the back, lifts the unit out, and brings it inside to his room. But when he sets it down, he notices the door is missing again. And honestly, this absolutely frightened him. In that exact moment, he was hit with the highly distressful thought that he was living in a computer-generated world, like an actual simulation with a glitch. So panicking, he borrows Oscar's flashlight and rushes right back out to the truck bed in the dark. And right there, just lying in the back of the pickup, he finds the door. It had apparently just popped off during the bumpy drive. Seeing this gave him a very brief, fleeting moment of relief. You know, the glitch wasn't real, gravity had just done its thing. But that relief, yeah, it vanished almost instantly. Part 3. The Hinge Paradox. A glitch in reality. This perfectly illustrates the core contradiction of the whole thing. See, Tazzledock remembered with total certainty that the original damage meant the hinge mount on the unibody was completely destroyed on one side. But the door he just discovered lying in the truck bed, it had hinges on both sides that were completely intact and symmetrical. He knew this wasn't a false memory, this was a glaring physical impossibility. So it all comes down to this question right here. How does a door simply fall off a unit when its hinge mounting point is physically missing? For the unit to look intact before the truck ride, something would have had to convincingly hold the door in place. Yet it fell completely free into the truck bed, totally undamaged. No way, right? While the next morning, Tazzledock examines the unit in the daylight to test this out. The door clearly fit the player, but as soon as he tilted it, the door just fell out loosely. It wasn't properly secured at all. It was just resting, kind of wedged into place. Now, this looseness perfectly explains how the bumpy truck ride dislodged it so easily, but it does absolutely nothing to solve that mismatched hinge problem. Which brings us to what we'll call the mundane hypothesis. Remember that temporary new place he was staying at? Well, it had a drawer that might have contained spare parts from another unit. The most logical explanation here is that Tazzledock did a quick, completely forgettable repair job, swapping in a replacement door from that drawer. Then, when he returned to his old place and saw the unit looking intact, he unconsciously failed to connect that appearance to the repair he had just made. The intact, symmetrical hinges on the replacement door actually heavily support this theory. Part 4. The Avoidance. Choosing not to know. And here is where we completely pivot the narrative. The physical investigation is totally fascinating, but Tazzledock's reaction is just a brilliant look into human psychology. He had the power to solve this right then and there. Literally, all he had to do was pull out the instruction manual and compare the original specs and hinge diagrams against the physical unit. But he didn't. He was simply too unsettled by the whole experience. His fear completely outweighed his impulse to investigate. He made an active, conscious choice not to look. Let's see how this builds over time. Years later, after moving a few times, Tazzledock finally worked up the courage to reconstruct the scenario. He actually located the instruction manual, but by then he'd already sabotaged his own investigation. Step 1, he had lent the unit out to someone. Step 2 is the kicker, though. He deliberately didn't care if the door fell out and was lost by them. Which means step 3, he ensured the physical evidence was permanently gone. When he finally had the nerve to look, the anomaly could literally no longer be tested. Part 5. Self-protection. Psychology of denial. Which brings us to the real psychological core of this explainer. Why do we act this way? Let's define the concept of epistemic self-protection, because it perfectly captures his mindset here. Epistemic self-protection is the active choice of preferring genuine underdetermination, which basically just means leaving a mystery unsolved, rather than uncovering a finding that might go either way and deeply disturb you. Sazeldok wasn't just being careless when he lost that cassette door. He was protecting his own reality. Finding out he might be right about living in a computer-generated world, that was simply too terrifying a possibility to risk confirming. So what's the final result of that avoidance? By letting the evidence slip away, that genuine underdetermination is preserved forever. The mundane account, the spare part from the drawer, keeps almost working, but we can never fully prove it. The complete account of this mystery actually has to include Tazeldok's own role in making sure it could never be resolved. The mystery remains, partly by circumstance, sure, but largely by his own protective choice. And that brings us to our final thought. We all have things we prefer not to look too closely at. So I want to ask you, what is your impossible cassette door? What mundane mystery or strange detail in your own life are you currently avoiding investigating out of fear of what the answer might be? It's a really fascinating question to chew on. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning, or, maybe keep protecting your mysteries.